My child was a female, and it had a man shoot her point blank in the face where they couldn't even put her face back together so I could have an open casket.
You should see her. Oh, do you see them? That's how long her nails are, y'all. Like, do y'all see?
911, what's the address of the emergency? Can I have somebody at 6841 Mayo Boulevard? Ma'am, he just took my whole phone, ma'am. Okay, listen, what is your relationship to him? Who is he? His name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number.
This woman reached out twice to the New Orleans Police Department through 911 and made complaints fearing for her life.
This is Aisha Davis, a 28-year-old mother from New Orleans whose life, filled with hope and quiet determination, would be stolen in the most chilling way imaginable. In the early hours of May 11, 2023, a man who was supposed to spend the rest of his life behind bars escaped prison and went straight to find his wife. What began as an ordinary morning, Aisha walking her daughter to the school bus, sharing a routine goodbye, would become the last moment of peace she ever knew. For weeks, she had been calling 911, terrified after receiving threats from her husband, a convicted killer who had slipped out of custody. She begged for help. She warned them he was coming, but the response came too late, twice. And not morning, he found her.
That's the sickening part about all of this. She's laid out on the concrete by herself.
When officers finally arrived, the scene was nothing short of horrifying. He had tracked her to her apartment, confronted her, and shot her. But what he did next revealed a level of brutality no one was prepared for. He ran over her body, leaving behind a trail of violence so disturbing that investigators would later describe it as one of the darkest cases they had ever worked. What unfolded in the investigation would expose failures, unanswered warnings, and a nightmare that Aisha saw coming but could not escape. Before we uncover the terrifying truth that unfolded in a single moment, let's step back and explore how what appeared to be a perfect relationship turned into a nightmare. Aisha Davis was born in 1992, making her 28 at the time of her death. She was the beloved daughter of Kenya Davis, surrounded by a supportive extended family who played active roles in her life, celebrating her successes and comforting her during hardships. Family members fondly remember her as warm, funny, and deeply devoted to her young daughter, Miles.
She was a very beautiful person. She was the life of the party, you know. She very respectable. Everybody she meet just loved her.
From childhood, Aisha was known as the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly lift the mood. Her relatives often described her as the glue of the family, the one who remembered birthdays, checked in on loved ones, and made sure everyone felt included during gatherings. Raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, Aisha grew up amidst a city renowned for its vibrant culture, music, and food, but also marked by rising crime and frequent violence. She lived in a small but close neighborhood where neighbors knew each other by name, creating a sense of community that offered both comfort and connection, even in the face of citywide struggles. While the specific schools she attended are not documented, Aisha pursued education that would allow her to enter the healthcare field, a reflection of her desire to care for others and make a tangible difference in their lives. Friends recalled that Aisha had always been drawn to helping people. Even as a teenager, she volunteered at community centers and assisted elderly neighbors with errands. But the same compassion, loyalty, and openness that made her so loved by everyone around her would also draw into her life a man who would ultimately turn her world into a living nightmare. Aisha worked as a certified nursing assistant, a role she embraced with dedication. She found fulfillment in caring for the elderly, assisting neighbors, and making life easier for those who relied on her. Her coworkers often described her as compassionate and dependable, a person who went above and beyond to help others without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, neighbors remembered her as someone whose presence could brighten a street, her laughter echoing through her community even on tough days. But Aisha wasn't just a caregiver. She was a vibrant, multifaceted woman. Known for her humor and quick wit, she had the rare ability to make others laugh even in the hardest moments.
She'll make you mad, but then a couple of minutes later, you couldn't do nothing but laugh at her because she was she just was a comedian in her own right.
She took pride in her appearance, always presenting herself with care, from her hair to her accessories. Active in her church, she contributed to her community in meaningful ways, showing up for those who needed her and leaving a lasting impression on everyone she met. However, Aisha's personal life carried its own challenges. She was in a relationship with 44-year-old Henry Talley Jr., a man with a long criminal history and a reputation for violence. Despite these dangers, she remained fiercely committed to her 5-year-old daughter, Miles Davis. Her family recalls that motherhood was the center of Aisha's world. She tirelessly balanced her professional responsibilities, personal dreams, and the demands of raising her child, always putting Miles first. Little did Aisha know, the very strength and kindness that defined her life would soon place her in harm's way, and when tragedy struck, it would leave her family and community grappling with heartbreak, loss, and questions that may never be fully answered. The tragedy unfolded on May 11, 2023. On that day, witnesses reported seeing Aisha in a heated argument with Henry Talley Jr. outside her apartment complex. Henry's past was marked by violence, though much of it seemed to fade into the background over time. As a teenager in 1996, he was involved in a drive-by shooting that claimed the life of a 12-year-old boy. Though he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. For years, that sentence stood as a reminder of the gravity of his crime. But decades later, the U.S. Supreme Court's rulings on juvenile sentencing changed the course of his life. New research on adolescent brain development led to the reconsideration of life sentences for juveniles, except in the most extreme cases. Henry's conviction was re-evaluated, and in 2021, after 25 years behind bars, he was released. He pled guilty to manslaughter and attempted murder, walking free with the promise of a second chance. On probation, Henry presented himself as a man determined to change. He attended anger management and personal development classes, projecting the image of someone who had turned a new leaf, or so many thought. To outsiders, he looked like a man striving for redemption, but beneath the surface, the same violent tendencies lingered. It was during this period that Henry met Aisha. At first, he seemed stable, even reformed, yet Aisha's family and friends sensed something darker. They noticed how her once bright personality began to dim, how Henry's controlling and manipulative behavior chipped away at her spirit. Her mother, in particular, warned her repeatedly about the toxic nature of the relationship. Over time, Henry's mask slipped. He isolated Aisha, fueled arguments with jealousy, and lashed out with explosive anger. Aisha tried to hold on, believing she could fix what was broken, but the abuse only grew worse. The vibrant young woman who loved deeply and lived passionately was slowly silenced. In the end, Henry's violence escalated beyond repair, and Aisha's life would be tragically cut short that day on May 11, 2023. Earlier that day, Aisha had moved through her morning the way she always did, gently waking her daughter, helping her get dressed, fixing her hair just the way she liked it. She kissed her little girl goodbye, watched her head off to school, and stepped back into what felt like an ordinary day. There was nothing to hint that anything was wrong, nothing to warn her that her world was about to shatter. But that quiet, familiar routine would be the last moment her daughter ever shared with her mother. Neither of them knew it, but it was the final goodbye, a simple, everyday gesture that would soon become a heartbreaking memory. Henry, who had recently been released from prison after serving 25 years for a manslaughter conviction, had been accusing Aisha of infidelity. Witnesses later recalled seeing the two of them outside an apartment complex, locked in a tense argument that quickly drew attention. From the way Aisha was speaking, it was clear she was trying to walk away from the relationship for good. Henry, however, was consumed by jealousy, accusing her of being unfaithful. Those nearby heard Aisha's voice tremble as she pleaded with him, asking if he was really about to go through with whatever he was threatening. Her words carried fear and a heartbreaking sense of disbelief. Minutes later, gunshots rang out. Aisha Davis fell to the pavement, shot multiple times, and was left lying in the street. What began as a desperate attempt to free herself ended in a tragedy that stunned everyone who witnessed it. In a horrifying act, Henry then ran over her with his gold SUV, killing her. The street where she was murdered was in clear view of passing traffic, including school buses and pedestrians, yet it took hours for police to arrive on the scene.
That's the sickening part about all of this. She's laid out on the concrete by herself.
The New Orleans Police Department quickly opened a homicide investigation. Detective James Fife and his team were assigned to the case, tasked with piecing together the final moments of a young mother whose life was stolen in broad daylight. The first challenge was the crime scene itself. Aisha had been killed on the South Interstate 10 service road near Mayo Road, an area busy with traffic even at that early morning. Witnesses confirmed seeing the fatal shooting and, horrifyingly, Henry running over Aisha with his SUV. Multiple passers-by, including school buses and pedestrians, had witnessed the aftermath. Yet despite the number of eyes on the scene, immediate action was hindered by the delayed police response.
Aisha called 911 at 6:12 p.m. on the 6th. Aisha called 911 back several times.
Boy, nobody never came yet.
The lack of response angering the young woman.
My name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number.
A woman in need of help.
Ma'am, is somebody coming soon? I have been reported this 2 hours ago.
NOPD didn't arrive till 5 a.m. the next day.
You call the police over and over and over, the police never come. So it tears me up a lot of days.
Aisha also called 911 on April 18th. According to police records and her mum's complaint, both times her calls were downgraded. And in both occasions, it took NOPD more than 10 hours to respond. And both calls were marked gone on arrival. Aisha was killed on May 11th. Her mum, Kenya Davis, wants answers.
How you gonna downgrade them calls like that when you hear stress in a woman's voice?
It also says the officer who arrived waits at Aisha Davis's residence for approximately 5 minutes before leaving. Kenya believes if NOPD treated Aisha's calls as an emergency, she'd still be alive today.
My child was a female and had a man shoot her point blank in the face where they couldn't even put her face back together so I could have an open casket.
The Davis family filed this complaint because they want to see change across the city of New Orleans. They want to make sure that no other young woman dies at the hands of their partner or former partner. And they want to make sure that any domestic violence call to 911 is taken seriously and never downgraded.
The murder of Aisha Davis was a preventable tragedy. Despite reaching out for help, despite living in a city with available law enforcement, her calls for protection went unanswered. Both times, calls were marked gone on arrival, even though she had expressed fear for her life. The dispatch logs revealed a 12-hour delay on each call, highlighting systemic failures in addressing domestic violence complaints. Detectives would reveal chilling information from Aisha's family. Aisha's father recalled urging her daughter to stay away from Henry, who had a known history of violence. Aisha's death was part of a broader pattern of violence in New Orleans. She was the 4th mother shot in 3 weeks and the 10th woman murdered in the city that year.
Less than 24 hours after Aisha was killed, 2 other women was killed in the city. Something has got to be done. It has to stop.
The circumstances surrounding her murder emphasize the deadly consequences of domestic violence and the devastating impact of systemic failures, particularly in policing and protecting vulnerable women. Aisha's case underscored glaring issues within the New Orleans Police Department and the broader criminal justice system. The city council, led by President J.P. Morrell, demanded answers.
This woman reached out twice to the New Orleans Police Department through 911 and made complaints fearing for her life. For us as a city to have victims and survivors take us seriously, we don't prioritize their safety by thinking a 12-hour response on 2 complaints of domestic violence is acceptable.
How could a domestic violence complaint, which clearly involved a history of threats and violence, not be treated as urgent? Public outrage grew as details of the 12-hour response delays became public. Calls for reform highlighted that victims of domestic violence often rely on rapid intervention for protection, yet bureaucratic processes and dispatch prioritization had failed Aisha. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell faced criticism for comments suggesting women played a role in violent incidents.
None of these acts are random at all. And what we have to understand that women also play a role in violent activity in our city.
I can't get past that statement.
Mayor Cantrell said she apologised to families for those remarks she made. 5 months later, Kenya says she's still waiting to hear the mayor say, "I'm sorry."
I think they have devalued women's lives.
While she apologized and clarified that her statement was intended from an investigative standpoint, many families and advocates found her remarks deeply insensitive. The mayor's comments sparked further debate over the responsibility of authorities to protect vulnerable women, particularly in neighborhoods affected by systemic neglect. On May 17, 2023, 6 days after the murder, Henry Talley Jr. was arrested in the 2600 block of Governor Nichols Street. He was charged with second-degree murder and a parole violation for the shooting of Aisha Davis. His past convictions, combined with his documented aggression toward Aisha, made him a high-risk suspect. Despite his arrest, the city grappled with the chilling reality that Aisha's murder was part of a broader pattern of targeted killings in New Orleans. In May-June 2023, detectives moved swiftly. Investigators from the New Orleans Police Department's Homicide Division canvassed the area, interviewed neighbors, and reviewed hours of surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras. Evidence collected included witness statements, cell phone data, surveillance footage, and Aisha's documented history of domestic violence reports. Detectives also obtained digital forensics from social media accounts, text messages, and call logs, which revealed a pattern of escalating threats and controlling behavior. Several witnesses came forward describing prior incidents where Henry had displayed aggression toward Aisha. Henry was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, possession of a firearm, and stalking. Prosecutors emphasized that the combination of physical evidence and Henry's documented history made the case strong enough to move forward quickly. His arrest brought temporary relief to Aisha's family, though they knew the legal battle ahead would be long. In 2024-2025, the pre-trial motions and delays began. The case wound its way through the court system. Defense motions, scheduling conflicts, and evidence hearings pushed the trial date back repeatedly. Throughout this period, Aisha's family attended every hearing, speaking publicly about domestic violence and urging the court to move forward. The delays were emotionally draining for the family, who often expressed frustration with the slow pace of the justice system. Advocacy groups began attending hearings as well, using Aisha's case to highlight the dangers faced by victims attempting to leave abusive relationships. On February 26, 2026, the trial began. After nearly 3 years, the trial opened in Orleans Parish Criminal District Court. Prosecutors presented a chilling narrative. Henry Talley ambushed Aisha, shot her multiple times, and then ran over her body to ensure she could not survive. Over the first day alone, 7 witnesses testified, including forensic experts and eyewitnesses. Phone records placed Henry at the scene. The courtroom was tense as prosecutors displayed graphic evidence and reconstructed the timeline of the attack. Forensic analysts testified that the injuries Aisha sustained were consistent with both gunfire and being struck by a vehicle. Jurors also heard emotional testimony from Aisha's family, who described her fear in the weeks leading up to her death. On March 3, 2026, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its decision. Henry Talley Jr. was found guilty of first-degree murder, possession of a firearm, obstruction of justice. He was acquitted of the stalking charge, but the most serious conviction, first-degree murder, carried enormous weight. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs as the verdict was read. Prosecutors called the decision a victory not only for Aisha, but for all victims of domestic violence whose warnings go unheard. Aisha's family, emotional but resolute, said they finally felt a measure of justice. While the verdict is confirmed, the formal sentencing date has not yet been publicly released. The family expressed relief, but also sadness that no outcome could bring Aisha back. They vowed to continue advocating for stronger protections for domestic violence victims. Under Louisiana law, a first-degree murder conviction typically results in life imprisonment without parole. Legal experts expect Henry to receive the maximum penalty given the severity of the crime and the overwhelming evidence presented at trial.
Every person on that jury could conceivably give him the death penalty, could vote to give him the death penalty if it is warranted.
Aisha's death shook her neighborhood. Residents expressed frustration at both the police response and the broader societal neglect of domestic violence victims. Her 5-year-old daughter, Miles, now faced life without her mother, while Aisha's family demanded answers and reforms to ensure that no other woman would suffer the same fate. Advocacy groups called for faster police responses to domestic violence, better tracking of repeat offenders, and increased awareness campaigns to educate communities about warning signs and available resources. Family and friends remember Aisha as a devoted mother, a warm-hearted friend, and a bright, humorous individual whose life ended far too soon. Aisha's murder highlighted deep-rooted issues in New Orleans, including the city's struggles with domestic violence, systemic delays in emergency response, and the vulnerability of women in urban areas. Her death became a rallying point for activists and advocacy organizations pushing for reform. The tragedy also sparked conversations about accountability. Families and community members demanded greater transparency from law enforcement, calling for an overhaul in how calls were prioritized and how repeat offenders were monitored after release. Though Aisha's life was cut tragically short, her story left a lasting impact on her community. Friends and family remembered her as a devoted mother, a loving daughter, and a woman with an infectious sense of humor. Her passion for healthcare and desire to help others highlighted her selflessness and care for her community. In the wake of her death, local organizations created programs in her name to support victims of domestic violence, offering educational workshops, emergency services, and legal aid. Her story became a teaching moment, reminding both authorities and residents of the dangers of ignoring warning signs and the importance of proactive intervention. Aisha Davis's murder was not an isolated incident. It underscored the persistent vulnerability of women in New Orleans and many urban areas, particularly those with a history of domestic abuse. Her death served as a stark example of how systemic failures, including delayed police responses and inadequate follow-up, can have fatal consequences. Aisha's life, though tragically short, continues to inspire action. From her devotion as a mother to her vibrant personality and professional ambitions, she touched countless lives. Her death became a catalyst for change, sparking legal, social, and community-driven reforms aimed at protecting women from domestic violence. Her family and friends continue to honor her memory through advocacy, education, and public awareness, ensuring that Aisha Davis is remembered not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, love, and the urgent need for systemic change. The story of Aisha Davis reminds us all that every life matters, and the responsibility to protect the vulnerable must be taken seriously, not delayed, ignored, or minimized. What do you think about it? Let us know in the comments below, and if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.